Beneath the moon's unyielding gaze, the fire wolves howled their verdict, leaving only ashes and an Omega's unbroken chill. The wind clawed at Alara's ragged cloak as she stumbled through the snow-swept pines, each step a betrayal of the life she'd known. The Northern Pack's territory stretched like a frozen scar across the mountains, its borders marked by ancient stones, etched with the Deuce's crescent phases. But tonight, those stones mocked her, silent witnesses to her exile. The air bit deep, carrying the acrid tang of smoke from the pyres that had lit her rejection, flames that devoured the last of her belongings, her status, her hope. She was no longer kin. She was the outcast, the Omega, whose scent had soured in the eyes of her Alpha, whose quiet strength had been deemed weakness. Ilara's breath fogged the night, mingling with the falling flakes that clung to her dark hair like fragile regrets. Her hands, numb and raw, clutched the one remnant of her past, the ancient scar on her palm, a silvery line from a childhood ritual gone awry, when the Pack's seer had marked her as touched by frost. It had been a promise, then, of hidden gifts from the Deusa herself. Now, it pulsed faintly, a cold fire against her skin, as if the moon above wept silver tears for her fall. The rejection had come swiftly, under the full lunar swell, when her betrothed Alpha, broad-shouldered thorn, with eyes like storm clouds, had scented another. "You carry no fire," he'd snarled, his voice echoing through the great hall of ice-hewn stone. "An Omega like you will freeze our line." The Pack had howled in agreement, their Weavos a chorus of dismissal, banishing her to the wilds beyond the wards. She pressed on, the snow crunching under her boots, each footfall sinking her deeper into isolation. The forest whispered secrets in the gusts, branches creaking like old bones, distant howls that might be wolves or worse, the fire wolves of legend, beasts born of cursed flames that scorched the earth. Alara's heart thudded, not with fear alone, but with the weight of unspoken grief. What was strength, if not enduring the cold that seeped into her bones? She'd been raised in the shadow of the Pack's eternal wars, where Alphas vied for thrones carved from glacial hearts, and Omegas like her wove the bonds that held the fragile peace. Yet her own bond had frayed before it formed, leaving her adrift in this lunar wilderness. The path narrowed, leading her to a frozen river's edge, its surface a mirror cracked by the wind. She knelt there, dipping her scarred palm into the icy flow, letting the chill numb the ache. Memories flooded her. The warmth of the Pack's hearth fires, the metallic scent of blood from ritual hunts, the soft glow of moonlight on Thorn's face as he'd once promised protection. Lies, all of it. The Deuce's light had revealed his deceit, and now it guided Alara into exile. She rose, scanning the tree line, where shadows danced like specters. The night felt alive, pregnant with unseen eyes. Was it the rival Packs, those fire-touched marauders from the southern volcanoes who burned villages in their raids? Or merely the wind playing tricks? A low growl rumbled from the darkness, freezing her mid-step. Not wolves, something heavier, more deliberate. Alara's instincts flared, her Omega senses sharpening to the metallic undercurrent in the air, blood fresh and mingled with the ozone of power. She backed away, her cloak snagging on a thorned bush, tearing further. The scar on her palm burned now, a counterpoint to the cold, as if warning her of fates entwining. She whispered a prayer to the Deusa, her voice lost in the howl of the gale. Guide the lost. Thaw the frozen heart. But the night offered no mercy. Footsteps crunched behind her, heavy, labored, not the light pad of prey animals. Ilara whirled, her eyes catching a glimpse. A massive form silhouetted against the moon, fur matted with crimson, eyes glowing with feral gold. An Alpha, wounded, his breath ragged like tearing fabric. Not from her pack, his scent was wilder, laced with smoke and ancient regret. He staggered forward, collapsing to one knee in the snow, his broad chest heaving. Claws extended, tipped with frost from the cold, but they retracted as his gaze locked on her, curious, not predatory. "Who?" Alara's voice trembled, but she didn't flee. The connection hit like a winter squall, instinctive, pulling at her core, yet shadowed by fear. He was no ordinary wanderer. The air around him hummed with restrained power, the mark of royalty fallen. A king in exile, perhaps, haunted by ghosts of his own making. The scar on her palm throbbed in rhythm with his labored breaths, the moon casting silver highlights on his scarred muzzle and the deep gashes across his flank. He lifted his head, voice a gravelly rumble that cut through the wind. "Stranger, the fires hunt me. If you're no enemy, share your chill." His words hung between them, a fragile bridge over the abyss of their shared solitude. Alara hesitated, the cold of her skin a shield against the heat radiating from his wounds. In that moment, under the indifferent stars, she felt the first stir of something forbidden, a curiosity that warmed the edges of her frost-bitten heart. The wind howled louder, carrying echoes of distant flames, as if the world itself conspired to draw them closer. Ilara stepped forward, against every instinct screaming retreat, her scarred hand outstretched in the moon's pale light. Alara's outstretched hand trembled in the moon's silver veil, the scar on her palm glowing faintly like frost-kissed quartz. The Alpha's golden eyes narrowed, assessing her not as prey, but as a puzzle etched in the night's chill. He was immense even on his knee, his fur a tangled storm of midnight black streaked with the red of fresh wounds, steam rising where blood met snow. The air between them thickened with his scent, smoke from distant infernos, the sharp tang of pine sap, and beneath it all, a undercurrent of raw power laced with sorrow. "Fire wolves," he'd said. The legends whispered of them in the pack's fireside tales, cursed beasts from the volcanic south, their pelts aflame, scorching loyalty and land alike in their endless conquests. If they hunted him, he was no mere wanderer. He was a target worthy of kings. She should have run. Every fiber of her Omega instinct screamed it, the wild unknown, the heat of his gaze clashing against her innate cold. Yet the scar pulsed, drawing her forward like an invisible thread spun by the Deusa herself. "The fires. What fires?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread against the wind's roar. He winced, a low rumble escaping his throat, not quite a growl, but a sound heavy with exhaustion. "The ones that birthed me into this curse," he replied, his words gravel ground under boot. "I am Eric, once Alpha of the Ember Clans. Now, just a shadow fleeing their blaze." Eric. The name struck her like a gust, evoking tales of the southern kings whose thrones were forged in lava flows, their packs notorious for burning rivals to ash. But this one bore no arrogance, only the weight of a crown that had slipped. He tried to rise, muscles coiling like ropes under strain, but a gash across his ribs wept crimson, staining the snow in dark blooms. Ilara's breath caught, the metallic scent flooded her senses, mingling with the crisp bite of winter, stirring something primal within her, a pull she dared not name. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as thorns, yet curiosity bloomed alongside it, warming the edges of her exile's chill. Why him? Why now, when the moon hung low and judgmental? Instinct warred with reason as she knelt beside him, the snow soaking through her cloak like accusatory tears. Her skin, perpetually cool even in the pack's hearths, brushed his fevered arm. He flinched but didn't pull away, his eyes locking onto hers, storm gray now in the lunar light, flecked with embers of gold. "Your touch. It's like river ice on scorched earth," he murmured, surprise etching his features. The connection sparked, unbidden, a flicker in her core, as if the Deusa whispered of bonds forged in opposition. But Alara denied it, shoving the warmth down deep. He was a stranger, a fugitive alpha whose kind had raised borders in wars that left Omegas like her widowed and wandering. Trust was a luxury she'd lost with Thorn's rejection. This was survival, nothing more. The wind howled a warning, carrying faint echoes, Weavos distant and furious, like the crackle of approaching flames. Irik's ears twitched, his body tensing. They're close. The fire wolves, my own kin, turned against me for refusing their Pyre King's madness. His voice cracked, revealing the fracture beneath his regal poise. Guilt, thick as blood, for the lives he'd led or failed to save. Alara's scar throbbed in sympathy, a cold fire mirroring his heat. She glanced at the tree line, shadows lengthening like claws. The forest, once a sanctuary in her youth, now felt like a trap closing. "You can't stay here," she said, more to herself than him. "The river's frozen, but it leads to caves, hidden by the falls. If you can walk." He nodded, gripping her arm for leverage, his claws retracted, but the pads of his hands rough with old scars. As they moved, his weight leaned on her, a reluctant alliance born of necessity. Each step sent jolts through her, his heat seeping into her chill, her steadiness anchoring his falter. Fear gnawed at her. What if he turned, claimed her as spoil in his desperation? Yet curiosity held her, questions bubbling unspoken. What crime had felled a king? What fire had he refused? The moon watched impassively, its light glinting off the river's cracks, turning the world into a mosaic of silver and shadow. They reached the riverbank's edge, where the water's murmur grew to a thunderous veil behind the frozen cascade. Erik stumbled, pulling her down with him into a drift of powder. For a heartbeat, they lay entangled, breaths mingling in the frigid air. His ragged, hers steady but quickened. The scar on her palm pressed against his chest, where his heart pounded like war drums under fur and flesh. "Why help me?" he rasped, eyes searching hers, vulnerability cracking his stoic mask. An Omega alone in these wilds. You risk everything. Alara met his gaze, the pull intensifying, a gravitational force she rationalized as pity. "Because the Deusa doesn't abandon the broken," she replied, though doubt laced her words. "And neither do I, not yet." She helped him up, ignoring the spark that lingered where their skins met. The caves loomed ahead, mouths of darkness promising temporary refuge, but the night pressed in, alive with pursuit. Distant howls swelled, laced with the crackle of unnatural fire, as if the very stars conspired to test this fragile thread between exile and king. As they slipped into the shadowed maw of the cave, the wind's fury muffled behind walls of ice-draped stone, Alara felt the first denial crack. The connection was there, instinctive and denied, born not of romance's foolish bloom but of fear's sharp curiosity and the shared chill of wounds unhealed. The scar on her palm cooled, as if appeased, while Erik's heat filled the space beside her, a counterpoint to the encroaching cold. Outside, the moon cast long shadows, and the fires drew nearer, hungry for their quarry. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's breath was a damp whisper against Alara's skin, carrying the mineral tang of ancient stone and the faint rot of forgotten winters. She eased Irik deeper into the shadows, his weight a forge-hot anchor dragging at her arm, each labored step echoing like a heartbeat in the confined space. The entrance loomed behind them, a jagged maw framed by icicles that wept slow tears into the snow, but the world outside pressed close, Weavos slicing through the gale, laced with the snap and hiss of flames devouring wood. Firewolves. The name coiled in her mind like smoke, evoking the southern horrors that had scorched pack borders in her youth, leaving charred earth and orphaned howls. They were no mere beasts. They were the Ember Clan's enforcers, twisted by their Pyre King's sorcery into living infernos, loyal only to conquest and the burn of betrayal. Alara's scar throbbed, a silvery vein of cold threading through her palm, as if it sensed the heat encroaching. She guided Eric to a ledge where the cave widened into a shallow chamber, its floor dusted with frost that crunched under their boots. He slumped against the wall, his massive frame folding like a banner in defeat, chest rising and falling in ragged waves. Blood seeped from the gashes on his flank, dark rivulets tracing paths down his fur, pooling in the crevices of stone. The metallic scent filled the air, sharp and intimate, mingling with the chill that seeped from her own body. She knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her already ragged cloak to press against the deepest wound. Her fingers brushed his skin. Fevered, taut over muscles honed by battles she could only imagine, and the contrast jolted her. Her perpetual cool against his blaze, like snow meeting ember. "Why do this?" Eric's voice rumbled low, eyes half-lidded but piercing, gold flecks dimmed by pain. He watched her hands, not with command, but with a quiet bewilderment, as if her touch unraveled some inner knot. Empathy stirred unbidden in Alara's chest, a fragile bloom amid the thorns of her caution. He was a king, reduced to fugitive, his regal bearing cracked by the weight of whatever sins haunted him. Guilt, she sensed it in the way his gaze averted, in the subtle tremor of his claws against the stone. It mirrored her own exile's ache, the rejection that had stripped her bare, leaving only the scar's cold promise. "Because turning away from the wounded is how packs fall," she murmured, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her edges. "And I've fallen far enough to know the cost." Outside, the wind's howl sharpened into frenzy, carrying the crackle of fire too close, too deliberate. Alara froze, her senses sharpening to the Omega's innate acuity, the acrid bite of smoke threading through the cave's mouth, the thud of paws on frozen ground, heavy and multiple. They were here, the firewolves, their pursuit a relentless tide. Eric tensed, a growl building in his throat, but she pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart beneath her palm. "Quiet," she whispered, the scar flaring as if channeling the Deuce's hush. "The falls mask the entrance, if we stay still." Her words trailed, doubt shadowing them. Stillness was her weapon, the cold calm that had always set her apart, but against flames that burned everything they touched. It felt like defiance, a moral stand in the face of annihilation. The chamber plunged into deeper shadow as clouds veiled the moon, but faint silver light filtered through cracks in the ice above, casting ethereal patterns on Eric's wounds. He shifted, wincing, and caught her wrist gently, his touch a reluctant tether. "You don't know what you're sheltering," he said, voice gravel rough with confession's edge. "I led the Embers once, burned villages to claim thrones, spilled blood for borders that meant nothing under the Deuce's eye. But when the Pyre King demanded I torch the sacred groves, the lunar temples, I refused, turned my own against me." His eyes met hers, raw with the melancholy of a king who had chosen ethics over empire, only to lose both. Guilt etched deeper lines around his mouth, a wound as visible as the gashes on his flesh. Alara's breath caught. His story echoed her own quiet rebellion, the unspoken doubt that had soured her scent to Thorn, marking her as unfit. What was strength if not choosing mercy when fire demanded vengeance? Empathy deepened, weaving through her fear like roots through frost. She didn't release his gaze, the connection solidifying, not the instant blaze of fated mates, but a slow thaw born of shared fracture. Her skin stayed cold under his heat, a steadfast counterpoint, as if the Deusa had forged her chill to temper his burn. "Then we're both exiles of choice," she replied softly, binding the cloth tighter. "The firewolves may hunt you, but they can't touch what the moon guards." As she spoke, the scar pulsed in rhythm with his slowing breaths, a symbolic bridge between their worlds, her frost, his flame, intertwined in the cave's hush. The assault came swift, a roar of wind and fire exploding at the entrance. Tongues of unnatural blaze licked the stone, melting icicles into steaming rivulets, the heat a visceral wave that singed the air. Shadows of wolves flickered in the glow, pelts wreathed in eternal fire, eyes like molten gold, their uivos a cacophony of rage and hunger. One lunged, claws scraping stone, but the frozen cascade held, a barrier of ice groaning under the assault. Ilara's heart pounded, the cold in her veins surging like a shield. She pulled Eric deeper into the recess, their bodies pressed close in the narrow space, his arm encircling her protectively despite his weakness. The intimacy was born of necessity, yet it stirred something visceral, a bond forging in the crucible of threat, empathy hardening into resolve. Flames crackled louder, probing the cave's defenses, the scent of scorched earth invading the chill. Eric's free hand found hers, claws sheathed, squeezing with a king's quiet command. Together, he breathed, the word a vow amid the chaos. Ilara nodded, the scar glowing faintly, as if drawing lunar strength from the stone itself. They waited, breaths synchronized, the enemy's fury a storm that tested their fragile alliance. Outside, the moon broke through clouds, its light a silver rebuke to the fire's rage, illuminating the wolves' retreat. Foiled for now, but the night whispered of pursuits yet to come. In that suspended breath, as embers died to smoke and the wind reclaimed its mournful song, Ilara felt the bond take root. Not love, not yet, resisted, rationalized as survival's mercy, but a thread of empathy, pulling her from isolation's depths. The scar cooled, appeased, while Eric's heat lingered against her side, a promise of trials that would demand more than refuge. The cave held them, a temporary womb of stone and shadow, but the world beyond burned with questions unanswered, destinies entwined under the unrelenting moon. The cave's silence settled like a shroud after the firewolves' retreat, broken only by the distant drip of melting ice and Eric's labored breaths echoing off the stone. Ilara remained pressed against him in the narrow recess, her body a cool anchor amid the lingering haze of smoke that clawed at her throat. The air hung heavy, laced with the charred bitterness of thwarted flames and the metallic undercurrent of his wounds, now staunched but throbbing in rhythm with her own pulse. Her scar, that silvery thread across her palm, lay dormant against his chest, its cold fire subdued, as if sated by the night's narrow victory. Yet beneath the calm, a tremor stirred in her core. Not fear now, but something deeper, an awakening she couldn't name, like the first crack in glacial ice under spring's hidden thaw. Eric shifted, his arm loosening its protective coil around her shoulders, though the heat of him lingered, a forge's glow seeping through her cloak. His eyes, those storm-gray depths flecked with fading embers, searched her face in the faint lunar light filtering through the ceiling's fissures. Silver patterns danced across his fur, highlighting the scars that mapped his past like ancient runes, marks of battles won and thrones lost. "You held the line," he murmured, voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone. An Omega's chill against their blaze. "It's more than mercy. It's power." His words hung between them, probing, as if he sensed the fracture in her exile's armor. Ilara pulled back slightly, rationalizing the flush in her cheeks as the cave's chill, denying the instinctive pull that had woven them closer. He was a king, haunted by guilt, his ethical stand against the Pyre King's madness a mirror to her quiet defiance of Thorn's rejection. But power? She was no seer, no warrior, just the outcast whose skin stayed cold, untouched by the pack's fire. The moon's glow intensified, a beam slicing through the clouds outside to pierce the chamber like a Deusa's probing finger. It caught her scar, igniting it with an inner luminescence that spread like frost across her hand, veins of silver threading up her arm, cool and insistent. Ilara gasped, the sensation blooming from ache to revelation, a surge of frost that numbed the air around her, drawing moisture from the stone into crystalline shards that hovered, glinting like stars fallen to earth. Her breath fogged unnaturally, the cave's damp turning to a veil of mist that swirled protectively, shielding them from the residual heat licking at the entrance. This was no mere chill. It was her gift, the touched by frost the pack's seer had foreseen, long buried under layers of doubt and dismissal. The Deusa's mark manifesting now in this womb of ice and shadow, as if the moon itself had waited for this union of opposites. Eric's eyes widened, the gold flecks reigniting as he watched the frost dance from her fingertips, weaving a barrier that cooled his fevered wounds, knitting flesh with threads of ice that gleamed like lunar silk. The pain in his flank eased, the crimson flow staunching under the crystalline touch, leaving only pale scars in its wake. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, not to claim, but to witness, awe etching his regal features. "By the Deusa, you're the Pathfinder," he breathed, the words a revelation that cracked the melancholy veil over his soul. Legends of the Ember Clans spoke of such an Omega, one born of northern frost to counter the southern blaze, a key to breaking curses forged in fire. His guilt, that heavy mantle from battles where he'd burned too freely, lifted fractionally. She was no random savior, but destiny's cold hand extended to redeem his fall. "The Pyre King's sorcery binds my kin in eternal flame, twisting loyalty to ash. But you, your chill can quench it, reveal the path to their freedom, and mine." Ilara's heart thundered, the manifestation a double-edged blade, empowerment laced with terror. The frost receded as quickly as it came, leaving her skin tingling, the scar pulsing with newfound purpose. Introspection flooded her. Memories of the pack's rituals, where Omegas were vessels for the Deusa's will, yet she'd been cast out for lacking fire. What was strength, if not this hidden mercy, choosing to heal when rejection had taught her only isolation? Yet doubt clawed. Eric saw her as key to his destiny, but what of her own? The connection deepened, resisted no longer as mere survival, but rationalized as fate's inexorable weave, her cold tempering his heat, her gift the bridge over his abyss of guilt. She met his gaze, vulnerability mirroring his own. "I never asked for this," she whispered, voice raw with the night's visceral truth. "Exile stripped me bare, left me to freeze alone. If I'm your path, what path do I walk?" Outside, the wind mourned with soft uivos, carrying the faint crackle of dying embers, a reminder that the fire wolves would return, their pursuit a tide of betrayal and war. Eric's hand closed gently over hers, claws retracted, the contrast of his warmth against her cool scar a symbolic vow. "The one that redeems us both," he said, melancholy yielding to quiet resolve. "I've carried the weight of burned groves and broken oaths, chosen ethics over empire only to wander cursed. You, Ilara, the Omega whose skin defies the claw, you're the revelation I fled toward without knowing." The moon bore witness, its light bathing them in silver, turning the cave into a temple of ice where destinies intertwined. Her gift had manifested not in glory, but in the intimate hush of shared wounds, a spiritual unveiling that demanded they face the dawn not as exiles, but as counterparts in the Deusa's grand design. Yet as the frost's echo faded, leaving only the steady drip of water and their synchronized breaths, Ilara felt the pull solidify, a bond of revelation, where her hidden power illuminated his path and his guilt forged her purpose. The night whispered of trials ahead, where this gift would be tested against flames that sought to consume all. In that moment, under the unrelenting lunar gaze, she accepted it, the cold in her veins no longer a curse, but the key to thawing the frozen heart of a fallen king. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The dawn crept into the cave like a thief, its pale light bleeding through the ice fissures to paint the stone in hues of muted silver and ash. Alara stirred, her body still entwined with Eric's in the night's reluctant embrace. The scar on her palm, a cool imprint against his healed flank. The revelation of her gift lingered in her veins like frost-kissed wine, empowering, yet heavy with the weight of what it demanded. She was the Pathfinder, the Omega whose chill could quench the Pyre King's curse, but as the cave's chill deepened with the morning's hush, doubt coiled tighter than ever. Freedom had been her exile's cruel gift. Now, this bond pulled her toward a war that wasn't hers, tempting her with love's redemptive fire even as it threatened to consume her fragile autonomy. Eric's eyes opened first. Storm-gray depths softened by the lunar night's confessions, his hand lingering on her arm as if afraid she'd dissolve into mist. The heat of him had ebbed during their shared vigil, tempered by her frost's healing touch, leaving only a shared warmth that she rationalized as necessity's echo. "The fire wolves will regroup," he murmured, voice gravel rough from disuse, carrying the melancholy of a king who knew betrayal's scent all too well. "My brother's the Pyre King now, Varg, twisted by the same sorcery that scorches our lands. He sees my refusal as treason, my flight as weakness. But with you." His gaze traced the scar's silvery line, awe mingling with guilt's shadow. "We can confront him, break the curse before it engulfs the north." Alara pulled away, the cave's damp air rushing in to fill the space, her skin prickling with the old cold that had always set her apart. Confront? The word tasted of chains, evoking Thorn's rejection under the pack's howling judgment. The northern pack, her own bloodkin, who had banished her for lacking the fire they craved. She rose, pacing the chamber's edge, boots crunching frost that mirrored the fracture in her resolve. The moon had waned slightly, its light now a thin veil over the world outside, where the wind whispered of gathering storms. What was love, if not another cage? Eric offered redemption, a path where her gift could heal his wounds and perhaps her own, but it meant facing the past's jagged teeth, the rival packs, the traitors who'd whispered against her, and now this southern blaze threatening to merge with her northern exile. They emerged from the cave as the sun crested the jagged peaks, its rays fracturing on the snow like shattered glass, turning the landscape into a blinding expanse of white and steel. Eric moved with renewed strength, his wounds sealed by her frost into pale scars that gleamed like lunar etchings. But the guilt in his posture remained, a slight hunch to his broad shoulders, as if the crown he'd forsaken still pressed down. Alara walked beside him, the scar throbbing faintly, a reminder of the Deusa's insistent call. The forest had changed in the night's fury. Charred branches jutted like blackened bones, smoke curling from distant spots where the fire wolves had tested the borders. Weavos echoed from the valleys below, not triumphant, but wary, as if the packs sensed the shift in fates. The confrontation found them at the frozen river's bend, where the water's cracks widened into a natural amphitheater ringed by ancient pines, their needles dusted with ash. Eric halted, nostrils flaring at the acrid wave rolling in on the wind, smoke and blood, laced with the unmistakable tang of kin turned feral. "Varg," he growled, the name a wound reopened. Figures emerged from the tree line, a dozen firewolves, pelts wreathed in smoldering embers that hissed against the snow, eyes molten and unyielding. At their head strode Varg, Irik's brother, taller even than the fallen king, his fur a cascade of crimson flames that left scorched earth in his wake. No crown adorned him, but power radiated like heat from a forge, his claws extended, dripping with the promise of betrayal's price. "Irik, the merciful fool," Varg snarled, voice booming like cracking lava, his gaze sliding past his brother to Alara with predatory curiosity. And what's this? A northern stray, reeking of frost and false hope. You've sunk low, brother, fleeing my justice for an Omega's chill. The pack circled, a ring of fire against the ice, their howls a cacophony that shook snow from the branches, filling the air with the scent of singed pine and fear sweat. Ilara's heart pounded, the scar igniting with cold fire, frost creeping up her arms unbidden. This was the past incarnate. Varg's sorcery echoed the northern pack's rigid hierarchies, where weakness was burned away, and Omegas like her were footnotes in the tale of power. Eric stepped forward, shielding her instinctively, his body tensing into the regal poise of old. Your justice is madness, Varg. The groves, the temples, you'd raise the Deuce's gifts for a throne of ash. I chose mercy then, and I'll choose it now. His voice carried the ethical weight of his guilt, the melancholy of battles where he'd spilled blood without question, only to awaken to its cost. But Varg laughed, a sound like flames devouring dry wood, lunging forward with claws that trailed sparks. The clash was visceral. Eirik met him mid-air, bodies colliding in a blur of fur and fury, snow erupting around them in white plumes, stained red. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic, splattering Ilara's cloak as she backed against a pine, the cold in her veins surging. The pack closed in, but her gift flared, a wave of frost exploding from her palms, crystalline shards lancing out to quench the nearest wolf's flames, turning their embers to steam and forcing them to yelp and retreat. Varg broke free, wheeling on her with eyes blazing. Pathfinder, he spat, recognizing the legend in her chill's defiance. Eric's salvation? Or his noose? Join us, Omega. Your frost could forge an empire unbreakable. The offer hung, a moral crossroads, align with the fire's conquest, gain power over her rejection's scars, or stand with Eirik's mercy, risking all for a love that demanded forgiveness over vengeance. Ilara's breath came in ragged bursts, the scar pulsing like a second heart, drawing her toward Eirik as he rose, bloodied but unbowed, his gaze locking on hers amid the chaos. Love or freedom? The pack's howls blended with the wind's mournful cry, the moon's faint echo in the daylight a spiritual prod. Thorn's betrayal flashed, the northern alpha who'd chosen fire over her quiet strength, but Eric was different, his guilt a bridge to her pain. Forgiveness meant war's mercy, a choice to heal rather than burn. No, she whispered, then louder, frost weaving a barrier between them and the encroaching pack. Mercy crowns the fallen, not the flames. Varg roared, charging anew, but Ilara's chill met him, a glacial wall that cracked under his heat yet held, buying Eric time to strike true. A blow not to kill, but to subdue, claws raking across his brother's shoulder in a spray of blood that sizzled on the snow. The Pyre King staggered, the pack faltering as the curse's hold flickered under her gift's influence. Yet victory tasted bittersweet. Varg's eyes, dimming with defeat, mirrored the traitors in her own past, forcing Ilara to confront the cost. As the wolves scattered into the tree line, tails low and flames guttering, she knelt by Eirik, her hand on his wound, frost sealing it with silvery grace. In that bloodied arena, under the indifferent sun, the dilemma etched deep. Her choice bound her to him, love's redemption. A war not ended but evolved, freedom traded for the ethical fire of shared purpose. The wind carried their mingled scents, cold and heat, blood and frost, whispering of sacrifices yet to come, as the Deuce's gaze turned toward the final forge. The snow-laden amphitheater lay scarred by the clash, steam rising from blackened furrows where fire had kissed ice, the air thick with the coppery reek of blood and the acrid ghost of quenched embers. Ilara knelt beside Eric, her scarred palm pressed to his fresh wound, frost weaving through his flesh like silver sutures, sealing the gash with a chill that hummed against her skin. The Pyre King Varg slumped in the distance, bound by vines of ice she'd summoned in her defiance. His flames guttering to weak flickers under the midday sun's indifferent glare. The scattered fire wolves had fled into the pines, their howls fading into whimpers carried on the wind, but victory felt hollow. A fragile truce etched in blood and frost, not the end of wars that simmered in the shadows of thrones and betrayals. Eric's breath steadied under her touch, his storm-gray eyes lifting to hers, flecked with the gold of a king reborn from ashes. The heat of him, once a fevered blaze, now tempered to a steady warmth that seeped into her perpetual cold, stirring the bond they'd forged through exile's crucible. Yet as the frost receded from his skin, leaving only pale scars that mirrored her own, a deeper ache bloomed in Ilara's chest. Her gift, the Pathfinder's chill, had revealed her destiny, but demanded its toll. Each surge drained her, the scar pulsing like a vein of moonlight, drawing vitality from her core. In the cave's hush, it had healed him enough to stand. Here, against Varg's sorcery, it had bent the curse's edge. But to shatter it fully, to cure the Ember clans of their fiery chains, freeing Eric's kin from the Pyre King's madness, would require everything. Sacrifice, the Deusa's unspoken price for Renacimento. She rose, the wind tugging at her ragged cloak, flakes of snow catching in her dark hair like fleeting regrets. The frozen river cracked faintly under the sun's thaw, a symbolic fracture echoing the moral chasm before her. Freedom whispered in the gusts. Walk away now. Leave this fallen king to his guilt-ridden path. Reclaim the solitude of her northern wilds where rejection's sting had hardened her into ice. Thorn's betrayal lingered, a ghost in the metallic tang of spilled blood, reminding her that love was no balm but a blade carving deeper than claws. Yet Eric's gaze held her, melancholy etched in the lines of his muzzle, his ethical stand against empires burn a mirror to her own quiet rebellion. What was compassion, if not choosing union over isolation, healing the wounds that mirrored her own? The moon, though hidden by daylight, tugged at her scar, a spiritual pull toward redemption's forge. Varg stirred, his crimson pelt smoldering faintly, eyes narrowing on her with the last embers of defiance. "Foolish Omega," he rasped, voice like cracking stone. "Your chill saves him, but dooms you. The curse feeds on sacrifice. Pour your frost into me, and watch it consume your light." His words slithered through the air, a final temptation. Power through submission, aligning with the flames to wield an empire where Omegas like her were no longer cast aside. The pack's distant uivos swelled, a chorus of the betrayed, pulling at Ilara's frayed resolve. She could end it here, rationalize retreat as strength, deny the bond that had thawed her exile's edges. But as Eirik pushed to his feet, his hand finding hers, claws retracted in gentle trust, the connection solidified. Not immediate passion, but a resisted weave of fates, accepted in the visceral truth of shared pain. "I won't let you burn alone," Ilara whispered, her voice steady against the wind's mournful howl. The choice crystallized in her core, union through sacrifice, curing the curse not for glory, but for the ethical mercy that crowned the fallen. She stepped toward Varg, the scar igniting with cold fire, frost surging from her palms in crystalline waves that cascaded over him like a glacial tide. The Pyre King thrashed, flames roaring in protest, but her chill pierced the sorcery's heart, quenching the infernal bonds that twisted his kin. Agony lanced through her, veins of ice cracking under the strain, her skin paling to translucence as vitality ebbed, the world blurring into silver-edged shadows. Eirik was at her side in an instant, his arms encircling her as she faltered, his heat a counterpoint that anchored her fading light. "Ilara." "No," he growled, guilt fracturing his voice, the weight of her gift's cost etching deeper into his soul. But she pressed on, the frost enveloping Varg fully, his body convulsing as the curse shattered, embers dying to smoke, his eyes clearing to the gray of untwisted kin. A shockwave rippled outward. Distant howls shifting from rage to bewildered freedom, the Ember Clan's blaze extinguished in a chain of lunar mercy. Ilara collapsed into Eric's embrace, her scar dimming to a faint glow, the cold in her veins a hollow echo. Renascimento bloomed in the pain. Her sacrifice cured not just the flames, but the fractures of their pasts. His guilt absolved in her choice, her rejection reborn as destiny's quiet power. The wind softened, carrying the scent of fresh snow and pine, the sun's rays warming the bloodied ground into tentative life. Eric held her close, his breath ragged against her temple, the union sealed in blood and frost, a love that transcended hierarchies, proving redemption's truth under the Diusa's watchful eye. "You've given everything," he murmured, voice thick with awe and sorrow, his forehead pressing to hers. "And in you, I find my crown." Ilara's eyes fluttered, weakness tugging at her edges, yet peace settled like moonlight on still water. Strength was mercy's choice, compassion's fire over vengeance's blaze. As the world hushed, the scar on her palm warmed for the first time, a bridge healed. Their bond a flame kept alive in the moon's eternal vigil. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.